that the role that cities can play in Africa's development is quite a significant one. We know already that cities are the engines of economic growth on the continent, and that high levels of urbanization are closely associated with high levels of production and GNP. And so in terms of the economic role, I think cities play quite an important role in providing jobs, providing opportunities for people in the economic realm. The main challenges of African urbanization are that so far we have not managed to create the kind of economic foundation for inclusive growth, so that we haven't managed to create jobs, for example, in our cities, where people and households coming into the city are assured that they have some kind of way of making a living, but even beyond the survival aspects, that they have some kind of way of investing in the future, in their children's future, and in climbing up the social ladder. We have not managed to create that kind of inclusive growth. That's the one thing. And I think in some cities, what we have seen is also a clash of culture. No, what we've seen is is a conflict where, because resources are so scarce and people are moving into cities, what we are seeing is a conflict that is created. For example, in Johannesburg, in South Africa, we've seen a whole the xenophobic violence, where the fight over scarce resources becomes played out around who's the foreigner and who's the local. In other places, we've seen how politics has, for example, in Kibera in the 2007-2008 elections, we've seen how politics has created this conflict between political parties, between ethnic groups. So in some ways, while cities are supposed to be these areas of a melting pot where people share and create ideas and create some kind of innovation, what we're seeing, because of this lack of a solid economic foundation, is the potential for conflict. And those are things that we need to look at as our cities grow. I think we have a lot of opportunity to address the key urban challenges. Let's talk about the challenge of job creation. We know that we have at least 80% of people in the informal sector. And we understand that the informal sector is not really highly productive, and it's not producing the number of jobs that we need to absorb the labor force. What can we do about this? I think that local governments, and I think that, that national governments can invest in trying to build informal entrepreneurs through training, for example, and through providing them capital and land, the kinds of things that one needs to expand enterprise and to create jobs and to increase productivity in the sector. And it's not it's a difficult thing, but we have the labor pool present that can do that. So that's one of the ways in which we can try and increase or improve our economic and our job creation initiatives. I think we also have the opportunity to really improve the way in which local authorities provide traditional services: water, electricity, sewers, garbage collection. And we can do this by strengthening local authorities, giving them the autonomy to raise revenues, giving them the autonomy to plan strategically, and providing them the support to engage communities. And I think this is something that a lot of countries are beginning to do, but it's very clear that we do need strong institutions, particularly at the local level, to address some of the problems that we have. But I think the key to unlocking Africa's urban problems are by building very strong partnerships between cities on the continent. By creating road networks, for example, between Nairobi and Kampala that allow for trade, that allow for produce to get quickly from Kampala into Nairobi markets, for example, that link cities in West Africa more sustainably, so that resources can be shared, so that goods and people can travel easily, so that we benefit from the economies of scale that come with allowing more integration between cities. And I think this is important. I think the African Center for Cities think tank comes at an opportune moment. At a moment when Africa's cities are growing and are said to be, and when Africa is said to be becoming a largely urban continent, and where the challenges of urbanization will become incredibly acute as populations move to cities. Why do we need think tanks? I think understanding the nature of urbanization of the continent is extremely important, because unless we understand what is happening, what is going on in our society, it's very difficult to provide effective solutions for some of the challenges that we are facing, and identify opportunities where there are. So a think tank is an extremely important basis for improving policy strategies. We haven't been very good at communicating the urban transition on the continent. And I think part of it is a mindset issue, where we have often thought of Africa as a largely rural area. What we know now is that we're not going to be we're not going to be largely rural for very long, and in a couple of decades we'll reach the urban tipping point. And in that sense, we need to find messaging that shifts people's mindsets and shifts the way people think about themselves on the continent. I think another thing has been political. Cities across the continent have often been seen as the spaces of political opposition. And as such, politicians and people who are who govern the countries have not necessarily been willing to invest in cities, because often these are the areas in which we find opposition. Whether we look at North Africa and the Arab Spring, where did the opposition come from? It came from cities. If we look at the struggle on the rest of the continent for a more democratic polity, the opposition came from major cities. There's definitely a role for Pan-African institutions to play in influencing the urban agenda. Whether we're talking about development financing banks like the African Development Bank, the Development Bank of Southern Africa, of the PTA Bank, which funds COMESA. I think that these institutions will play a strategic role in financing urban infrastructure. And they can lead by example. If they make urban priorities, then oftentimes the politicians will follow suit. And I think organizations like the African Union can also make a huge difference in pushing the urban agenda. And they have, they have identified cities as a key strategic area of focus and investment. I think we need more than that. I think we need to move beyond talk and get the politicians and these organizations to back up their talk with real action on the ground. Organizations like the UCLGA are incredibly important and have been fighting the fight around championing the city's agenda on the continent. And I think they will continue to play an important role, both at a political level and also at trying to ensure that we get some form of financing that helps keep cities going and improve and investing in urban services. I have two messages to give to the AfriCities delegates that are convening in Johannesburg at the end of this year. The first is that we have to radically rethink urban institutions and urban government so that we move beyond their role as just traditional service providers for urban infrastructure, but as entrepreneurs, as building human capacity and training, as well as being responsive to their democratic responsibilities to communities. My second message is that we have to provide political incentives for the ruling class to support our urban agenda. We haven't been very good at providing a message that draws on their support, but we have to figure out ways in which we can attract the support and the champions that make decisions in order to prioritize the urban agenda on the continent.